Have you ever noticed that despite our massive, beautiful human brains and our endless capacity for complex thought, sometimes, just sometimes, we behave exactly like a simple animal?
Oh, absolutely.
Like that famous example of the turkey hen. She has these powerful maternal instincts, but she'll pull a stuffed weasel, her mortal enemy, close if it just makes that specific little cheep, cheep sound.
It's that single sound. That's the trigger feature. It activates this whole rigid behavior program. It's like click. The maternal instinct tape goes in and run. It plays out with acceptance and protection.
And that mechanism, that ability for one simple cue to just bypass all the complex processing, that's really the perfect metaphor for human influence, isn't it?
It really is. We love the idea that we make these careful, calculated decisions all the time. But in reality, our behavior a lot of the time is just following these incredibly predictable automatic patterns.
And that predictable response is what this deep dive is all about. We're decoding the psychology of compliance, and it's all based on years of systematic research.
Right. And this wasn't just some lab study. The social psychologist behind this work spent nearly 3 years immersing himself in the trenches.
Right. Living and working among the people who live and breathe, getting others to say yes.
Exactly. The salespeople, the fundraisers, the marketers, the recruiters, you name it.
So this was a really exhaustive, real-world study.
It was all designed to synthesize and understand the fundamental psychological principles, what he calls the 7 universal levers of influence that govern and, often short-circuit our human decisions. These levers create the shortcuts our brains have to rely on to function day to day.
And we are going to unpack every single one of them for you. We're going to explore reciprocation,
Liking, social proof, authority.
scarcity, commitment, and consistency.
And finally, a newer one, unity.
So our mission today is to give you not just a list, but a deep, functional understanding of these levers.
Because knowledge is power here. Understanding these automatic patterns is vital. They make you, terribly vulnerable to anyone who knows exactly how they work. We want you to gain the ability to recognize when these powerful shortcuts are being used ethically to help you.
And when they are being ruthlessly exploited by, as the source calls them, profiteers, to your detriment.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with that foundation, the click-run mechanism. When ethologists studied animal behavior, they repeatedly found that these complex behaviors weren't triggered by the whole situation, but by one specific isolated feature.
Right. Think back to the male robin's territorial defense. You might assume he attacks a rival based on seeing the whole bird, but the research showed the trigger is purely the red breast feathers.
So you could have a perfect replica of a robin.
A perfect stuffed replica, yes. If it lacks the red feathers, he'll ignore it. But, and this is the amazing part, he will furiously attack a mere clump of red feathers you just place on the ground.
Wow.
The entire complex defense sequence is activated by that one simple cue.
And here's the crucial insight for us, for humans. We, too, rely on these mental shortcuts. And it's not because we're intellectually lazy.
Not at all. It's because we're overloaded. We live in a world that is so saturated with information that if we stop to process every single piece of relevant data for every decision, from buying groceries to choosing a car, we'd suffer massive cognitive paralysis.
We'd never get anything done.
Exactly. Our own sophisticated mental apparatus has created a world that is just too complex for it to handle in real time. So instead of conducting some rigorous analysis for everything, we fall back on these reliance heuristics. We trust a single piece of good evidence to guide us.
And one of the most common, most powerful shortcuts we use when we're unsure of an item's quality is that old stereotype. Expensive equals good.
The classic.
And it's generally a reliable rule in commerce, right? You usually do get what you pay for.
You do. But once that generalization becomes an automatic rule, that's when it becomes a vulnerability.
And there's a great story that shows this perfectly with the slow-selling turquoise jewelry.
Right. The customers were, well-to-do vacationers, sophisticated shoppers, but they didn't know anything about turquoise quality. So they were facing a high cognitive load decision, how to value this unknown product.
So they just defaulted to the heuristic.
They defaulted to expensive, good.
And when the owner, in frustration, just dramatically increased the price of the pieces,
Sales skyrocketed.
it's amazing. Nothing about the jewelry changed. Not the cut, the setting, the display, nothing.
Nothing. The price alone became the single trigger feature for perceived quality. It instantly made the item seem more valuable, more desirable just through that shortcut.
What's fascinating here is that the shortcut isn't just a matter of subjective desire. It has tangible, measurable physical effects.
Yes, you can see this in medical research involving pain relievers. So participants received an identically effective pain reliever, but half were told it cost a mere 10 cents a pill, while the other half were told it cost
A
$2.50.
huge difference. And the ones who believed they got the more expensive pill.
They rated it as much more effective in dulling the pain of electric shocks. And this wasn't just a placebo effect in the classic sense. It was the expectation, driven by that price stereotype, that physically fulfilled itself through the body's own internal chemistry.
So our mental shortcuts are literally shaping our physical reality.
They are. We saw a similar thing with a drink advertised to boost problem solving. It worked measurably better when participants paid more for it.
But here's where the danger comes in. The introduction of what the source calls mimics.
Yes. In nature, mimics are organisms that copy the trigger features of others, like a firefly that copies the mating flash of a rival species just to lure and exploit them.
In compliance professionals, the profiteers, they do the same thing. They exploit our automatic human shortcuts for their own gain.
And the most potent modern battleground for this is with fake online reviews. They leverage the social proof principle, a lever we'll get to later.
Okay, so the data shows that as digital purchasing accelerated between 2014 and 2018, our favorable responses to online reviews rose from 88% to 92%. So we're relying on them more.
We are, but here's the critical sort of counterintuitive insight. At the same time, the trust that people placed in positive reviews actually dropped from 72% to 68%.
So why is that?
It's because the constant presence of fake reviews, these mimics, is actively undermining our confidence in this shortcut. The very mechanism that helps us decide is being eroded because we just can't trust the cues anymore. It's creating this systemic, long-term doubt in our automatic trust systems.
That makes the mission of understanding these principles even more urgent. Okay, so before we dive into the 7 core levers, let's briefly touch on what you might call a pre-principle tactic. It's a framing device called the contrast principle.
Right. It's all about setting the stage for influence. It makes a targeted request look much smaller or more acceptable by comparison to something else.
It's exploiting our inability to judge something in isolation.
Exactly. We judge the difference between things, not the things themselves. If you lift something really heavy, a subsequent object of average weight feels much, much lighter than it actually is.
And the anecdote here is just unforgettable. It's this dramatic, lengthy letter from a college student to her parents.
Yes.
She starts by apologizing for her long silence, and then she just delivers this cascade of terrible, shocking news. A skull fracture, a concussion from jumping out a window during a dorm fire.
It gets worse. Moving in with a gas station worker, getting engaged, and the finale being pregnant.
It's brilliantly manipulative. As the parent, you are just emotionally exhausted and cognitively overwhelmed by the time you reach the end of that letter.
You are. The source material cuts off right before she makes her actual real request, but the psychological result is basically guaranteed. Whatever that final request is, whether she needs money for a trip or just got a bad grade, it's going to seem laughably trivial by comparison.
So it's manipulative, but ruthlessly effective. It perfectly shows how manipulating that frame of reference makes the smaller, real request incredibly easy to accept.
Okay, so now we move into the first of the major levers, reciprocation.
This is the simple yet, tremendously powerful rule that says we feel obligated to repay favors, gifts, or actions provided to us.
Right, and this isn't just about being polite. It's an incredibly powerful rule of social currency. It's so foundational to human society that it can often overwhelm other factors that might normally determine our compliance.
Like whether we even like the person asking or if the request is even reasonable.
Precisely. We need these systems of mutual obligation to function as a society. They allow us to give something valuable away, time, money, a favor, with the confidence that the resource won't be lost. It fosters cooperation and trust. The rule is deep and ancient.
But here's the massive vulnerability. The rule doesn't require us to have asked for the favor to feel obligated.
That's the key. The simple obligation to receive makes this rule so easy to exploit. You're indebted whether the gift was solicited or not.
So that feeling of indebtedness is triggered instantly by an uninvited favor.
Instantly. Look at the Disabled American Veterans Organization. Their standard mail appeal for donations usually pulled in about an 18% response rate. But when they included an unsolicited, cheap gift like those gummed individualized address labels, the success rate nearly doubled to 35%.
Wow.
The cost of the labels was trivial, but the psychological return was immense.
And what's particularly potent is that this sense of obligation frequently results in these highly unequal exchanges. The psychological debt can feel so uncomfortable that we'll agree to a request for a substantially larger favor just to get rid of that feeling.
That's the core counterintuitive nugget here. Take the Joe Reagan study. Joe buys a subject an unrequested chip Coke. When he subsequently asks that subject to buy raffle tickets from him, the subjects who got the Coke bought twice as many tickets as those who didn't.
So Joe successfully chose the form of the initial favor and the form of the return favor.
He controlled the whole exchange. The subject had their free choices basically removed by the sheer discomfort of the reciprocal debt. I mean, the Coke cost maybe 25 cents and the tickets were $1.
So the psychological burden of owing someone is just completely disproportionate to the monetary value. The debt is the burden you're paying off, not the raffle ticket itself.
This lever works even in casual family and community settings. There's the story of the American emigre in Australia whose 5-year-old daughter was leaving these scribbled crayon drawings, unintentional gifts, in the neighbors' mailboxes.
And the father was worried about being seen as a litterer.
Right. But the neighborhood responded by sending back expensive Hallmark cards, packets of sweets, small toys. The neighbors felt compelled to return the gesture, and it eventually led to the daughter making a whole group of friends.
Just from that powerful evolutionary drive to reciprocate a gift, even a simple crayon drawing, it just overrode everything else.
And corporations play this game masterfully. When Starbucks celebrated its 40th anniversary, they offered free online gift card vouchers. But they added a psychological kicker.
What was that?
Any customer accepting the voucher had to explicitly thank the company on social media. They were converting a simple marketing giveaway into a reciprocal transaction by forcing an active public act of gratitude. It just heightened those feelings of obligation.
Okay, let's talk about high-stakes politics, because this is where the lever shifts from retail to institutional. Lyndon Johnson, early in his presidency, was just uniquely successful in getting these monumental programs through Congress.
Right, even ones facing stiff opposition. And this wasn't necessarily, political savvy in the abstract sense. It was his long career as a powerful, favor-granting figure in the House and Senate. He was able to call in a large score of favors.
He had provided assistance to those colleagues for years, and when he needed compliance for his Great Society programs, he capitalized on that accrued psychological debt. But wait, are we saying that a president's legislative success is fundamentally less about the merit of the policy and more about the psychological debt from old favors? I mean, that sounds deeply cynical.
Or is it just the most basic human nature applied to power? It's human nature. If you remove that system of debt, the whole system seizes up. Look at subsequent presidents, Carter, Clinton, Obama, Trump, who often came to the presidency from outside the Capitol Hill establishment.
Right, they campaigned on being indebted to no one.
But that idealism had a real cost. A lot of their early legislative difficulties can be traced to the simple fact that no one there felt indebted to them. Reciprocity isn't just an option, it lubricates the entire machinery of legislation.
The second key tactic within reciprocity is the strategic concession. And that leads to the powerful rejection then retreat technique.
Also known as the door-in-the-face technique. It exploits the obligation to make a concession to someone who has just made a concession to us.
The mechanism is simple. The requester starts with an extreme demand, they make sure it's rejected, and then they immediately retreat to the smaller actual request.
Right. The rejection then retreat strategy works because the subject feels that the requester made a concession to them, and therefore they feel they have to reciprocate with a concession of their own.
Regardless of whether they wanted the item in the first place.
Exactly, like the classic Boy Scout example. He asks for a massive, expensive ticket, gets rejected, and then immediately retreats to the much smaller $1 candy bar request. The subject feels compelled to switch from non-compliant to compliant because the request was presented as a retreat, a compromise.
The brilliance of this is highlighted in that salary negotiation story. An employee who wanted a fair raise, say 23%, and 1 day of remote work.
Right, so he strategically asked for the average market salary, a 30% increase, knowing his boss would sharply reject it.
And once that no was delivered, he immediately retreated to his real goal.
The 23% raise and the remote workday. And the boss, having just made a concession by rejecting the first request, felt obligated to make a counter-concession by accepting the second, smaller one. The employee got both.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The sweet, secret side effects of this technique.
Yes. It doesn't just increase compliance with the second request, it increases the likelihood that the person will actually carry out the request.
And agree to future requests.
Exactly.
Why? Why does that happen?
Because the subject walks away feeling like they won the negotiation. The victim feels more responsible for and more satisfied with the arrangement after this exchange of concessions. They see the outcome as a result of their own ingenuity, not just surrender to a manipulative process.
That feeling of being tricked, of having made a large concession for a small favor, that's the moment we need to recognize the trap. So what's the defense?
The defense is to be alert to that feeling of being trapped into complying with a request you don't actually want to perform. The moment you realize that the initial favor wasn't genuine assistance but an exploit, a trick, you have to emotionally redefine it.
So accept a genuine favor, but refuse to feel indebted to a trick.
Right. You only repay genuine favors. If someone gives you an unsolicited gift, you have to treat it for what it is, a sales tool, not a kindness, and then you are psychologically free to refuse the return request.
Okay, moving on to our third lever, liking. The rule is simple. We are far more likely to comply with the requests of people we know and like.
And compliance professionals have perfected turning affinity and friendship into, well, stunning profits.
The clearest commercial example of this is still the Tupperware home party. The source calls it a classic compliance setting.
And it is. Tupperware sales now exceed $5.5 million a day globally. The genius is that the purchasing environment is engineered to exploit the liking rule. You're making purchases from friends, not strangers.
So the emotional ties of friendship just overwhelm the economic rationality of the decision.
Exactly. And this reliance on pre-existing relationships is formalized in corporate strategy through the endless chain method. Companies like Sackley train their salespeople to approach new prospects armed with the name of a friend who suggested I call on you.
Which makes turning the salesperson away extremely difficult. You're not just rejecting a stranger, you're implicitly rejecting the friend who referred them.
And the data overwhelmingly supports this. A Nielsen survey showed that 92% of consumers trust product recommendations from someone they know. That's far higher than any other source.
And that elevated trust translates directly into loyalty and profit. I saw a stat for one bank where customers referred by a friend proved 18% more loyal over 3 years and 16% more profitable.
So liking acts as this powerful accelerant for pre-existing trust.
So we need to understand the factors that increase liking. Let's start with the obvious one, physical attractiveness.
Right. This triggers the halo effect, an unconscious bias where we automatically assign positive traits like talent, kindness, and intelligence to attractive people. This just makes them inherently more persuasive in areas completely unrelated to their looks.
Which is why sales training often includes detailed grooming hints, and why con artists are so often highly charming and attractive.
We simply drop our guard when dealing with an attractive person. We assume their appearance reflects their character.
Okay, what's next? Similarity.
Similarity, even tiny, seemingly irrelevant similarities are powerful. Studies show voters prefer candidates who share minor facial similarities with them. In negotiations, parallels and language styles, using similar words and expressions, don't just increase romantic attraction.
They actually increase the likelihood that a hostage negotiation will end peacefully.
It's true, we trust those who speak and look like us.
And similarity can be manufactured, right? Through the unethical but shockingly effective practice of nonverbal mimicry.
Yes. Food servers trained to subtly mimic customers' words or body language received significantly higher tips. Negotiators who imitated their opponent's verbal style got better results. The key insight is that this happens unconsciously on both sides. We tend to drastically underestimate the degree to which similarity affects our liking and our trust.
Another fundamental factor is praise or compliments.
Compliments are automatically favorable. It's a pure click-run response, even when they're transparently manipulative. Our brain just processes the positive signal before our critical evaluation can even engage.
The great case study here is Joe Girard, who was named the world's greatest car salesman 12 years running.
His secret: he sent over 150,000 cards a year, every single month, to former customers, with the only message being, I like you.
That's it.
That's it. The consistent flattery, though generic, provided a massive return on investment by generating continual positive affinity. And sincere praise can be especially effective if it's delivered behind the recipient's back, giving them a reputation to live up to.
Beyond individual factors, liking is built through contact and cooperation.
Right. But simple, forced contact, like school desegregation, can often worsen hostilities if it includes distasteful, competitive experiences, like being forced to compete for grades in a classroom.
So what's the solution?
The solution is collaboration for mutual benefit. The classic sheriff research, the Robbers Cave studies, showed intense hostility between these two groups of boys, the Eagles and the Rattlers, after they were forced to compete.
But that hostility vanished.
It vanished only when the groups were forced into situations requiring mutual cooperation, working together to fix a stuck food truck or pooling their resources to repair the water supply. They switched from rivals to friends through shared necessary struggle.
The final key component of liking is conditioning and association. We naturally link the messenger with the message or the person with the event. This is an ancient phenomenon.
Oh, very ancient. Historically, imperial messengers in Old Persia would be treated as heroes for bringing news of victory, but summarily slain for bringing news of military disaster. They were victims of association.
And the modern equivalent is the TV weatherman who gets hate mail and threats during bad weather.
Even though everyone knows, rationally, he only reports the weather. Connecting with positive events boosts popularity. Connecting with bad things hurts it.
This principle is the backbone of advertising. Advertisers link products to things we already like, often without any rational connection. The classic car ad with a seductive female model is the perfect example.
Men who saw that ad rated the car as faster, more appealing, and better designed. Yet when they were questioned, they fiercely denied that the model influenced their judgment at all. It works entirely unconsciously.
You just associate the positive feeling generated by the model with the product itself.
Exactly. And the most intriguing financial evidence comes from studies on credit card logos and spending. So, college students were asked to examine catalog items in a room. For half the students, the room contained MasterCard logos.
And the mere presence of the logo.
The mere presence spurred the students to spend 29% more on the catalog items. They were also markedly more likely to give money to charity, 87% versus 33% if the logo was present, even when they were paying with cash.
Wow.
The logo is a pure conditioning mechanism, linking generalized positive feelings to whatever immediate activity is happening.
And finally, we manipulate the visibility of our connections to winners to improve our own public prestige. This is basking in reflected glory, or burging.
After a home team victory, just listen for the pervasive use of the pronoun we. We won, we're number one.
Right.
The fan is deliberately trying to imply the closest possible identity with the winning team. They're trying to claim success and absorb the glory, even if their only contribution was sitting on a couch.
And when they lose, you hear a lot less we and a lot more they.
Of course.
Our fourth lever is social proof. This is the idea that we determine what is correct behavior by finding out what other people think is correct and seeing others perform the action.
It's the wisdom of the crowd. If a lot of people are doing it, it must be the right thing to do.
It's an essential and usually reliable shortcut. I mean, if everyone is rushing toward the exit, you should probably rush too.
Exactly. This is why advertisers emphasize things like fastest growing or largest selling. It's an immediate signal of validated quality.
But the vulnerability, as we established earlier, is the manufactured social proof. Profiteers actively create this falsified evidence.
Right. Nightclub owners create long waiting lines outside when the club is half empty, just to signal desirability. Bartenders salt their tip jars with a few dollars to simulate prior tips. And, as we discussed, fake online reviews remain an ongoing battle.
Social proof seems to work best when people are in a state of uncertainty.
Absolutely. When we are unsure of ourselves, in an ambiguous situation, we look to others to define reality for us.
And this leads directly to the danger of pluralistic ignorance in emergency situations.
Yes. If a potential emergency occurs, say someone collapses on a busy street, and bystanders are uncertain if it's a real emergency, they look at those around them. If everyone else appears calm and hesitant, people assume, based on social proof, that the situation is likely a non-emergency.
And because everyone is silently looking to everyone else for proof, the overall calm response leads to massive inaction. The victim suffers from this pluralistic ignorance.
So the single most critical defense in an emergency is to drastically reduce that uncertainty and assign clear responsibility.
Don't just shout help.
No. You must be precise about the need for aid and assign specific, unambiguous responsibility. You, in the blue shirt, call 911 immediately. This cuts through the ambiguity and forces an individual to act, overriding the paralysis caused by the social proof of inaction.
The sheer strength of the many is terrifying. There's that staring experiment.
Right. If one person stands on a sidewalk staring up, very little happens. But bring 3 or 4 friends, And within 60 seconds, up to 80% of passersby will lift their gaze to your empty spot. The critical mass works up to about 20 people. It's just hard to resist the pull of the herd.
This collective pull, the plaquing effect, has a rich history.
It does, going back to 19th century opera, where businessmen would lease themselves to singers to provide paid applause to stimulate a genuine, unforced audience reaction.
And we see that principle applied today. There are concerns that presidential candidates are seating on-site debate audiences with raucously loud, visible followers.
The goal is simple: to influence the remote viewers watching on TV. The on-site audience response often wins the day with remote audiences in terms of who won the debate, proving the power of a manufactured crowd.
We're also most influenced by the actions of people who are like us. This is persuasion.
The Bible salesman anecdote illustrates this perfectly. He saw a respectable 62% jump in sales when he started using testimonials from previous customers.
But he realized he was inadvertently giving some customers an out. When he used a married couple's name to a housewife, she had a legitimate reason to say, "I should probably talk to my husband first."
The jump only became dramatic when he started to segment his social proof. He used only female customer names for female prospects, males for males, and couples for couples. By leveraging that exclusive similarity, he validated the purchase through peers, and sales increased significantly again.
We look to similar others for validation, especially when we're uncertain.
And this combination of uncertainty and exclusive similarity brings us to one of the most spectacular and tragic acts of compliance of our time, the Jonestown tragedy.
Right. Jim Jones's masterstroke was moving the People's Temple community from urban San Francisco to the remoteness of equatorial South America.
The alien Guyanese environment created maximum uncertainty. The crops were failing, the outside world was hostile, and the only people who were similar, the only peers, were the other Jonestown residents.
That exclusive similarity ensured the principle of social proof operated with maximum devastating force.
So when the first fanatically obedient members took the poison drafts, the rest followed mechanically. The herd mentality, fueled by the isolation and the uncertainty, was just complete.
And that influence of similar others is visible in smaller tragedies, like the Werther effect.
Yes, where highly publicized suicides cause a dramatic increase in subsequent fatal car and plane crashes. Research suggests these are copycat deaths, often among people similar to the victim who die at accelerated rates.
What's underlying all this conformity isn't just logic, though. We literally feel pain when we resist the crowd.
That's right. Neuroscientific research shows that when participants resisted the consensus of other people, the sector of the brain associated with negative emotion, the amygdala, was activated. It registers the pain of independence. Defying the group physically hurts.
So we know social proof is essential, but it's easily manipulated. What's our defense?
You should use social proof as an autopilot until you recognize an inaccuracy. But the real defense is to check objective facts and your own prior experiences. The lesson from aviation safety is stark.
How so?
Pilots have crashed because they focused too much on the social evidence prior pilots had landed safely, or the crew seemed calm, and not the mounting physical evidence, bad weather, mechanical failure. The key isn't asking, is everyone doing this, but are the objective facts pointing to the same conclusion as the crowd?
We turn now to the power of authority. This is maybe the most disturbing lever, given the shadows cast by the Milgram shock experiments.
Right. Ordinary people continued to deliver dangerous, life-threatening shocks to a pleading victim simply because a researcher in a lab coat told them to.
Milgram's participants became twitching, stuttering wrecks, yet they obeyed to the end, driven by this deep-seated sense of duty.
This obedience is trained into us from birth. We need a multi-layered system of authority to allow complex social structures to function. We assume these figures have greater access to information and power.
The paradox is that this automatic obedience, which is generally beneficial, kicks in even when it makes absolutely no sense at all.
And that leads to devastating and preventable consequences. The medical field provides frightening, quantifiable evidence of this mindless deference to the attending physician, the boss.
Annual deaths in the U.S. from medical errors exceed all accidents combined.
And the subordinates, the nurses, the residents, they stop thinking once an order is given precisely because they are reacting to authority, not thinking critically about the substance of the instruction.
The classic illustration, the rectal earache case, is almost comical if it weren't so terrifyingly simple.
It really is. A doctor abbreviated a prescription location as place in ear. and the nurse operating under the assumption that the authority figure knew best and that it wasn't her place to question it.
Promptly administered the eardrops to the patient's anus.
Following the directive precisely, this is blind obedience to the symbol of authority overriding basic medical sense.
The sheer ridiculousness of the rectal earache just proves how deeply we abdicate our own thinking when a doctor is involved. We just transfer all responsibility to the authority figure.
And this leads to another major vulnerability. We are often vulnerable to the symbols of authority rather than its actual substance. Con artists and compliance professionals rely heavily on these simple cues.
What are the 3 symbols that reliably trigger our compliance?
First, titles. People automatically defer to those introduced as doctor or professor. The title alone carries the weight of expertise. Second, clothing. A man dressed in a freshly pressed business suit jaywalked, causing 3.5 times as many pedestrians to follow him into traffic as when he wore work clothes.
The suit provides an immediate unearned badge of legitimacy. And third,
The trappings. This is where con artists combine the elements beautifully in schemes like the bank examiner scheme. A con artist impeccably dressed in a business suit, so title and clothing approaches a victim.
the victim is persuaded to withdraw all their money to supposedly help the bank set a trap for a dishonest teller.
And the final stage involves a man dressed in a uniformed bank guard costume, the trappings arriving after hours to collect the money and return it to the vault. The victim's compliance is secured entirely by these visual, superficial symbols.
Now, how can a communicator quickly acquire perceived trustworthiness, even when they're a true expert?
By strategically referencing a weakness or failure early on. This makes them appear transparent and honest, and it bolsters their credibility before they detail their strengths. This is a crucial element of ethical influence. Warren Buffett is a master of this.
Right. In a crucial annual report, he started the section on Berkshire Hathaway's strengths by reestablishing his transparency.
He admitted his particularly egregious error of acquiring Dexter Shoe for $434 million, whose value promptly went to zero before detailing his formidable financial successes.
So by detailing his failures first, the readers are ready to trust him more deeply. The information is coming from a source that is clearly, voluntarily, and actively transparent about their mistakes.
It massively enhances perceived truthfulness.
So, if authority is so powerful, what is the action plan for defending against it?
We have to ask 2 critical questions systematically. First, is this authority truly an expert? We have to check the credentials and their relevance. For instance, that Vicks Formula 44 commercial was highly successful because it featured an actor who played a doctor on a popular TV drama.
So you have to check if the person actually possesses medical training. Do they have authority in this specific field?
Exactly. And the second question addresses the Buffett principle. How truthful can I expect the expert to be?
Consider their trustworthiness and whether they stand to gain from your compliance.
We are more swayed by experts who appear impartial or who seem to argue against their own interests. This is the tactic used by the expert waiter. He argues against his own financial interests by recommending slightly less expensive dishes that are excellent tonight, only to massively inflate his trustworthiness for subsequent, more expensive recommendations.
Ultimately leading to a much higher total bill and tip. He sacrificed a tiny short-term gain for a massive long-term one. Scarcity is next, and the principle is simple. People assign dramatically more value to opportunities that are less available.
But the driving force here isn't just desire, it's loss aversion. We are far more motivated by the thought of losing something we have or could have than by gaining something of equal value.
This is why compliance tactics rely so heavily on limited number and deadline tactics.
This offer ends tonight, or only 3 remaining. If you don't act now, you will suffer a loss. We see this in the car salesman's hurry tactic, where a customer is asked to commit to buying an appliance when told it's the last one.
The commitment is secured at the point of perceived scarcity, even though the salesman invariably finds more in the back room later.
By then, the public commitment holds, but the initial trigger was the potential loss of the item.
The core psychological insight of scarcity is that it triggers psychological reactance.
This is a defense mechanism. When any of our freedoms, like the freedom to choose or the freedom to purchase, is threatened or restricted, our desire for the restricted item automatically increases as a way to assert and defend that freedom.
We have several brilliant examples of this emotional surge, just overriding rational choice. The Mormon Temple tour is one.
Right. The person had no prior interest in touring a Mormon temple, but once they learned they would never again have the chance to see the restricted sector if they didn't act soon, their interest surged. The interest was driven entirely by the potential loss of freedom to choose the experience.
Another classic example is the Romeo and Juliet effect.
Parental attempts to keep young lovers apart inevitably fuel their devotion to a white heat. The interference restricts their freedom, and the teenagers defy those barriers to assert their free will and choice. The relationship becomes more desirable simply because it's denied.
My favorite example that proves the item's intrinsic value is totally irrelevant is the Miami detergent ban.
Yes. When Dade County banned phosphate cleaners, Miami residents immediately rated the now restricted phosphate detergents as gentler, more effective, and better in every measurable way than residents in unaffected Tampa.
The product didn't change at all. The freedom to choose it did.
The psychological reactance caused a massive surge in perceived quality for the banned item.
And the same mechanism drove the bizarre Old Coke fiasco. Gay Mullins, the man who led the crusade to bring back Old Coke, actually preferred New Coke in a blind taste test.
He admitted he liked the taste of the new product, but the urgency that drove him and the nation was the loss of choice. The thing they liked more was less valuable to them than the thing they were being denied.
Coca-Cola officials were bewildered, but it was simple psychological reactance caused by the loss of established consumer freedom.
Scarcity is most effective under two optimizing conditions. First, when the item is newly scarce, a sudden imposition of loss. This is far more motivating than something that has always been restricted.
1 second.
Second, when we compete with others for the resource. Competition for a limited resource creates powerful, motivating properties. This is the entire foundation of open bid auctions, which drive up prices far beyond rational value.
The network bidding war for the movie The Poseidon Adventure is a clear demonstration of that.
It is. Despite the sale producing an expected $1 million loss for the winner, the network president involved nearly lost his head and just kept bidding simply because the novelty of the competitive auction format spurred him on. He was terrified of the loss of the item to his rival.
The coup defense here is to recognize that scarcity triggers this emotional arousal that just suppresses thoughtful analysis.
Right. You have to use that arousal, that sudden surge of panic or excitement, as a signal to stop short. Calm your emotional brain first.
Then, once you're calm, ask the critical counterfactual question, why do I want this item?
And if you want it for ownership collecting status, then use its scarcity to gauge price. But if you want it for function, to drive it, drink it, eat it, remember, the item will function equally well whether it's scarce or plentiful. The scarce cookies or the scarce detergent weren't any better when you finally got them. The value is in the utility, and the utility doesn't change based on availability.
Our sixth lever is the profound psychological drive for commitment and consistency.
People desire to be and to look consistent with their words, their beliefs, their attitudes, and their deeds. Society values consistency because it provides a reliable, useful shortcut.
The initial commitment is the key. Once you take a stand, even a small one, it sets the stage for automatic consistency. This is the logic behind Amazon's pay-to-quit program.
Right, which offers employees up to $5,000 to leave. And this program doesn't just weed out the disengaged. For those who choose to stay in the face of an incentive to quit, that difficult personal choice solidifies and enhances their allegiance.
They've made an active commitment, they chose the company over the money, and their self-image shifts to that of a loyal, dedicated employee.
This principle is often utilized through the foot-in-the-door technique. Start small and build momentum. The Chinese prison camp strategy during the Korean War was elementary. They got American POWs to write trivial, mild, anti-American statements, which created a momentum of compliance that gradually changed their self-image to that of collaborators.
And the Friedman and Fraser study demonstrated this beautifully with the civic virtue trap.
Homeowners who first agreed to place a tiny "Keeping California Beautiful" sign were later willing to place a very large, ugly "Drive Carefully" billboard, a different topic entirely.
Because the initial small voluntary agreement changed their self-image into public-spirited citizens.
And they complied with the large, burdensome request just to be consistent with this new identity.
So for commitments to be truly effective, for them to change that self-image, they must possess 4 characteristics.
And they must be active, public, effortful, and voluntary.
The effortful characteristic explains the resilience of severe initiation rites like Fraternity Hell Week or tribal rites.
Research shows that the severity of the initiation heightens the newcomer's commitment to and liking for the group. They suffer to join, so they must value the group highly to justify the suffering. This mechanism is a vital act of group survival, ensuring future members are loyal.
That makes perfect sense. The young woman who endured pain for her eyebrow piercing refused to remove it because she had suffered too much to obtain it. The pain justifies the decision.
And the public and active nature of a commitment is equally important. The Deutsch and Girard experiment showed that students who publicly wrote down their initial judgment were the most inclined to stick with it, even after receiving contrary evidence. They didn't want to look inconsistent to others.
This is leveraged with stunning effect by restaurants trying to reduce no-shows.
Right. They changed the receptionist's closing line from the passive, "Please call us if you change your plans," to asking, "Will you please call us if you change your plans?" And then waiting for the customer's active, public, verbal response.
By forcing that verbal, active commitment.
The no-show rate plummeted from 30% to 10%. The simple act of saying yes publicly created a massive commitment to follow through.
The most insidious consistency tactic is the lowball technique.
Yes, where an advantage is offered to secure a commitment, and then, after the favorable decision is made, the original advantage is deftly removed.
Car dealers are experts here. Customers buy the car even after the original price deal is pulled, because the initial commitment has generated its own support system of new justifications.
They start telling themselves, "The car runs great, the color is perfect, I need a car now." These new supports remain when the original price advantage is removed, and the commitment holds because they've convinced themselves they chose it freely.
That self-justification is key. It makes a person feel pleased with a poor choice because they feel they chose it freely, even after the terms changed.
The experiment showing students accepting an early morning study before being told the time proves this. 56% accepted, and 95% of them actually showed up.
The defense against consistency requires critical awareness. We have to know when our automatic consistency is leading us into foolish, rigid behavior.
And the body gives two signals. First, the stomach signs, that initial gut feeling, that wave of queasiness when you realize compliance is a mistake and you're trapped.
So in that lowball car negotiation, the stomach sign is the moment the salesman comes back and says, "Sorry, the manager says we can't honor that price." That's the signal to stop.
Absolutely. You have to trust that initial gut feeling before your rational brain engages to defend the poor choice. The second signal is the heart of hearts. This involves asking the critical counterfactual question, knowing what I now know about the true cost. If I could go back in time, would I make the same choice?
And you have to trust the first flash of feeling in response before the cognitive apparatus engages to rationalize the prior decision and fool yourself.
Exactly.
We come now to the seventh and final lever of influence, unity. This is a recent addition to the principles, but it is immensely powerful.
And this is not about liking, where people say, that person is like us. Unity is about shared identity, where people say, that person is one of us.
The we is the shared me.
It refers to kinship, locality, tribe, or family. When you are operating inside these boundaries of shared identity, agreement, trust, and cooperation are just exponentially easier to achieve because you are fundamentally connected.
Kinship, the family connection, is the most potent form of unity. Consider the sheer power of promoting kin welfare shown in that professor's study.
He offered students 1 extra credit point on a single test if a parent completed a lengthy questionnaire.
97% of parents complied with that request for 1 trivial point for 1 child.
That extraordinary compliance speaks to the deep evolutionary potency of the family connection. People will jump through hoops for kin welfare.
Warren Buffett leveraged this in a crucial letter reassuring shareholders about Berkshire Hathaway's future. He strategically opened by saying, "With that warning, I will tell you what I would say to my family today if they asked me about Berkshire's future."
By framing his arguments in a familial context, he merged his identity with his audience. He wasn't just talking to shareholders. He was talking to his family, fostering maximum trust and aligning their interests with his own.
This lever is absolutely crucial in business and finance, where trust is paramount. Ali Reda, the man who surpassed Joe Girard's sales record, credited his success to following Girard's methods, but adding one secret ingredient.
Ethnic we-ness.
He focused intensely on the Arab-American community in Dearborn, leveraging that shared ethnic identity.
And this created instant in-group trust where Joe Girard's Italian heritage was a non-we status for many of those potential customers. The shared identity bypassed typical sales skepticism.
And we also see this bypassing of skepticism in the Madoff Ponzi scheme. Madoff was Jewish, and the majority of his victims and recruiters were also Jewish.
Despite the high financial sophistication of many of the victims, people who should have known better, their shared ethnic identity overcame the usual necessary financial skepticism that should have been there, given the unusual profits Madoff was claiming.
The tribal bond built trust, where objective facts should have raised immediate alarms.
Unity can also be built through co-creation and synchronous action. We know the IKEA effect shows that people value items they helped build. They co-created the item. Similarly, asking a friend or customer for advice often results in getting an accomplice.
So the act of co-creation fosters a feeling of togetherness, regardless of how useful the advice actually is.
And synchronous activity, acting together in time, is a powerful unitizing mechanism. Children who sang and walked together in time with music were 3 times more likely to help their partner spontaneously and intuitively.
This helps us understand the immense global appeal of musicians. Music and romance are strongly associated. About 80% of contemporary songs are about romance.
It's not about the rational probabilities of success, it's about the harmonious, synchronous action of music fostering unity and emotional connection.
Unity can also be forged through shared suffering. Mutual struggle creates incredibly powerful bonds.
The Choctaw Nation sent aid to the Irish during the Great Potato Famine in 1847, just years after enduring the horrific Trail of Tears relocation.
This act of incredible generosity was a function of shared misery, sparking empathy and a sense of our people.
They recognized the suffering of another group, establishing an immediate, profound unitizing factor.
Finally, we can use the concept of locality, one of the smallest forms of unity, to resolve that troubling mystery we heard about in the sources. The Nazi concentration camp guard who unexpectedly executed the 11th prisoner instead of the 10th.
Right. The standard execution routine was brutal and rigid, yet when the 10th victim was brought forward, the guard paused and, using his rifle stock, knocked the victim out of the line, executing the 11th man instead.
Why the deviation?
His unexpected mercy was extended to the 10th victim because they shared a commonality of birthplace locality. That small unitizing factor, the feeling of being our people from the same region, was enough to pierce the hardened moral armor of the guard and cause him to break from his horrific routine.
Sparing that single life. It just proves the depth of the unity principle.
It really does.
That brings us to the end of our deep dive into the 7 levers of influence: reciprocation, liking, social proof, authority, scarcity, commitment and consistency, and unity.
And the common thread running through all of them is that automatic click-run nature of these mental shortcuts.
This reliance on shortcuts is not a failure of intelligence. It's a necessary adaptation to the modern world.
Right. We are forced to deal with an environment so complex, so fast-paced, so information-laden, that we must increasingly rely on these primitive, single piece of good evidence cues, much like lower animals.
And the critical synthesis here is that the information age is not the knowledge age.
That's a key point, because information must first be processed, absorbed, comprehended, and integrated. And when we're rushed or stressed or uncertain or distracted, we just revert to these primitive single cue shortcuts.
And you notice how these principles often combine. Liking and unity often act as accelerants for social proof and reciprocation.
Exactly. And since the frequency of shortcut exploitation is, destined to increase, we have an ethical imperative not just to be vigilant, but to be actively retaliatory against those who abuse the system.
We have to unflinchingly promote those who arm us with knowledge and demote those who seek to harm us by faking evidence.
That means boycotting brands that plant phony reviews, calling out misleading, faked, average person on the street ads, and refusing to comply when you recognize that an influence principle is being abused. You have to demand integrity from those seeking your compliance.
So the discussion highlighted just how potent shared suffering and kinship are in uniting disparate groups, overriding rational hostility.
Very potent.
Considering the current global climate-facing existential threats like climate change, global pandemics, or just the sheer overwhelming complexity of information overload, what unifying enemy could be strategically highlighted to compel worldwide necessary cooperation?
And if we know that consciously pulling that unifying lever is effective, is it an ethically justifiable choice to do so for the greater good?